gentlemen, I'm glad to say that we can make a start now for our second panel. And while I think it's fair to say that the first panel was more directly comparative, Poland-Germany, and we already began to talk about differences and similarities in the experience, especially since the 1880s and 1890s, I think we are now becoming trilateral or perhaps even quadrilateral because we will be talking about Poland, Russia, Germany, and ultimately also Europe and the EU. And of course, being a historian, I can't resist trying to point to the many historical roots that, of course, we will also be thinking about, at least in the back of our minds, as we begin to talk about the most recent developments. And there have been some quite exciting or disturbing developments also. But of course, when Poles look at the Russo-German relationship, they always remember, of course, the many divisions that they have experienced between these two major powers, and of course also the Nazi-Soviet Pact in 1939. And in the West, living in this country, I must say that whenever there is some dealing between the Germans and the Russians, as you probably know, Rapallo immediately comes to mind, and that was also very much a debate, a question mark at least, that was raised during the recent pipeline business. So I think we have a very interesting mix of expertise in this panel this morning. There is first of all Professor Nowak, who is a historian at Jagiellonian University in Krakow, who has written 11 books, and I just wanted to mention one or two of the titles. One, From Empire to Empire, Perspectives on Eastern European History, which appeared in 2004, a study of Pilsudski's Eastern policy. Then Between Tsar and Revolution, a study of the great emigrations, political imagination and attitudes towards Russia. So as you can see, he is clearly very well versed in our topic, but I think it's also fair to say that he is very much a public intellectual, at least in the sort of North American sense, because he's very much involved also in public discussions, not just as a historian, and is actually the editor of a well-known journal, Arcana. Secondly, I would like to introduce Cornelius Ochman, who comes from what I would like to call the private sector, so to speak, and its present involvement. Namely, as you probably know, the big foundations in Europe have, both before 1989 but also after 1989, been deeply involved in change in East Central Europe in particular. And I know this because it was probably, as you know, the Americans who first got involved in this. I've worked myself on the Ford Foundation and its activities during the Cold War period. He works at the Bertelsmann Foundation, is very much involved in East Central Europe, but Bertelsmann has taken a different approach from the other German foundations, Bosch and so on. Namely, they try to work through the European Union. He himself, however, is particularly interested in Ostpolitik. He has also lived in Moscow. He has observed the Russian scene very closely, and I think he would like to bring in the sort of Ostpolitik factor, which is in the topic of this particular session. And then finally, there is Mr. Jan Ross, who I think is probably the most influential commentator and correspondent of Die Zeit at the moment, specializing in East Central Europe. You will probably have read some of his articles, which appear almost in every issue of Die Zeit, that I think very influential weekly published in Hamburg. He himself worked at the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung for a number of years, and then moved to Berlin working for the Berliner Zeitung, and now he is the Berlin-based correspondent for East Central and Eastern Europe for Die Zeit in Hamburg. So I thank you, all three of you, that you came here, and we will look forward to your discussion. I would like to proceed as in the program. Professor Nowak, would you like to come first? And then the only request I have, please would you confine yourselves to, well, 15, 20 minutes so that we have time for discussion at the end, because I'm sure otherwise the audience will be very frustrated if we can't talk about Russia, Poland and Germany and the United States. Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to start with a short commentary to the latest statement by Bundesminister Frank-Walter Steinmeier, whose article on, this is the exact title, Interaction and Integration, a New Phase of Ostpolitik, published in the latest issue of Internationale Politik. I read with a great interest. Actually, German foreign minister tries to persuade probably himself and his readers that in Russia everything goes in good direction, and even if not everything is all right at the moment, we are persuaded to believe that there are no real strong important obstacles on the way to a radiant future of our EU-Russian relations, so to speak. I would like to make two quotations from this article. First, in Russia there are many, not just President Putin, who want to see Russia form close ties with the EU. I would like to stress this, not just President Putin being perceived as the anchor of pro-European sentiments or direction of Russian politics. The second quotation. We want Russia to be prosperous and guided by Europe's values and traditions, to succeed in making the transition to a stable democracy based on the rule of law. And that's the end of quotation. And with that, I would like to come back to the title of the article, Interaction and Integration. Interaction is something that goes two-way, actually. Not only one way, Russia becoming more Europeanized, so to speak, but it also can be the vice versa processes. And I'm afraid that, and I would like to say a few words on this, that we are observing a processus which makes us, especially Poles, a little bit nervous. A processus in which it is Europe, through Germany, that is, so to speak, infected with Russian values or Russian perspective on international politics. By Russian, I mean now official state and their members, as represented by President Putin. The first thing that comes to my mind when I try to comment on German, but also, to put it in a broader perspective, Western European perspective on Russia, is relative neglect of what does Russian state represents now, what values it represents in embodied, so to speak, by its president. To what extent the thing that was mentioned by Minister Steinmeier, this Europe's values and traditions, can be, so to speak, adjusted to the fact who President Putin is and how large support is in Russia for quite different values and traditions he represents, being a former KGB officer. I would like to bring some data connected to this situation in Russia. According to a sociologist connected to Levada Center, the most respected sociologist center in Moscow, of Russia's 1,000 leading political figures, including department heads of the presidential administration, all members of the government, all deputies of both houses of parliament, the heads of federal units, and heads of regional executive and legislative branches, 26% had reported serving in the KGB or its successor agencies. Looking more closely at the biographies of these persons, hunting for the gaps and oddities that almost always appear in the employment records of the former intelligence officials trying to conceal their clandestine work, reveals that 78% have an intelligence affiliation. So this is something connected to, I would say, historical policy. Whether we want to forget what KGB and NKVD stood for, or we want to remember. If we want to remember, we have some problems with Russia as it is now, what she represents now. When we want to film Katyn movie, it is against not, I would say only, unfortunately, historical crimes of Stalin's regime, but also for continuators of the institution that organized that crime and who rule actually the country. But there is also another very important side of this particular situation of Russia as it is, and as it is not seen, not perceived in the West. The fact is that this specific, so to speak, secret services perspective on international arena also influences very much international relations between Russia and the EU. When we take it into consideration, we have to remark that there is no historical precedent for a society so dominated by former and active duty international security and intelligence officials. Men who rose up in a professional culture in which not only murder could be an acceptable, even obligatory business practice. All intelligence services create their own ethical universe. The United States, the Central Intelligence Agency officers probably represent a slightly rougher version of the ethics common to most Americans. However, in Russia, the KGB ethics represent a domain where totalitarianism justified ugly practices from which the average Russian person probably recoiled. All intelligence operatives study and exploit the dark side of human character. All good operatives search constantly for weaknesses. KGB officers excelled in this, and that's how they operate also on international basis. They look for weaknesses, they look for the worst instincts, and they organize around or along these lines their foreign policy in order to divide, in order to exploit the weak, and in order to deal only with those who are more powerful than Russia itself. I'm afraid this picture escapes from the Western general, so to speak in general terms, from Western attention. If we would like to look at the consequences in past 8-7 years, I would like to propose a short overview of stages of the consequences this overlook has for Western or German, but also differences between Western or German, Western European or German on one side, and Polish and Eastern European new members of the EU perspectives on Russia. First, we had, so to speak, before even 1989, a clear perspective in which for Poles, as for many other Eastern European nations, the best perspective was to join NATO as organized along its original lines, that is, to keep Russians out, to keep Germans low, I'm afraid, and to keep Americans in. It couldn't go this way after 1989, it's obvious, but not only in the way that the Cold War ended and Germany reaffirmed its position in the enlarged and expanding European Union, but also to the fact that there were, so to speak, new elements of overall international, so to speak, situation that influenced changes in this perspective. First, we had, I would call it, the end of history stage, where Russia was perceived as, along with Poland, along with other Eastern European countries, a candidate for a happy new world organized along Western European or just Western standards and values, joining this world with new President Yeltsin or with even his predecessor Mikhail Gorbachev. But it soon evaporated with a new perspective when Russian experiments with economic reforms failed, especially in ordinary Russians' eyes, and when both Western European efforts and American efforts to help these reforms were considered as futile, as ineffective, and actually compromising this perspective of Russia joining the West, Russia joining so to speak, Western European standards after all horrible experiments of communist times. And with that, we went into a new stage that we could call, along another famous book from here, from the States, the Clash of Civilization stage, where Russia accepted, so to speak, with a kind of resentment, its place as being rejected from the West and being in conflict with the West. These were times of the second term of President Yeltsin, especially with many conflicts between, I would say, especially Russian intellectual opinion on one side and Western European, or just to put it in a broader perspective, Western standards. This created this clash of civilization perspective, created a special place for reaffirmation of, so to speak, old traditional place of Russia vis-à-vis Europe as, in some ways, partner for real politics game only, not for standard application, Western European standards application, or a rival on a global scale. And with that came Putin. He started his policy with what is called securitization of politics. He was glad to observe how the United States took a new stand with September 11th in war against terror, and so resigned from standards concerning human rights violations, which were especially important for Russia in dealings with Chechnya, where 200,000 people were killed, with almost no reaction from the West, especially after 2001, when the United States stopped to criticize Russia for this, while EU was also not very active in this respect. Then Europe divided after American intervention in Iraq into old and new Europe, to use this famous or infamous phrase by Donald Rumsfeld, became a kind of, I would say, subject of a strategic game by Russians to divide Russia internally, to divide Europe internally, making only Western Europe the only real Europe and the only partner for Russia, while describing Eastern Europe, new members, new future, so to speak, members from 2003 perspective of the EU, not real Europe, not a real partner for Russia. And this perspective was for a moment muddled with Orange Revolution in 2004, when EU played also, with the help of Poland, an active role in helping Ukrainian, so to speak, democratic forces to prevail, which was considered by Russian politicians as intervention on their own zone of influences or interests. However, with Putin-Schroeder deal to build the Northern Pipeline, a new phase, I would say, of rationalization of relations between Russia and, so to speak, Western Europe, or the only real Europe, took place. This was based not on securitization, as with the US, but on economization. We propose you, this was the line of Russian propaganda, normal economic deal. We have oil you need, so you can handle this with us, or we can go somewhere else, to China. It is you that need, you Europe, you Europeans, that need our oil, and we are not condemned or forced to deal with you. We can go somewhere else. So either you play our game, or you lost, international or global game for the future with China, with the United States. So you have to play along our rules, not we have to play along your rules, your European standards, your European values. And so I would like to quote to the end a commentary by a very intelligent Russian political scientist, Fyodor Lukyanov, who contrasts these two stages, initial stage of the end of history, so to speak, and the latest stage of economization of relations between the EU and Russia. Initially, this is quotation from Fyodor Lukyanov, integration was seen as making Russia's social, political, legal and economic models closer to those of the EU, as harmonization of the law standards and rules on the side of Russia with the EU. In other words, it was proceeded from the assumption that it would be a European model that would serve as an example to follow, and that the rate of integration would only depend on how fast Russia changed in the right direction. Today, Moscow views integration as a process of mutual rapport based on coordination and exchange of interests, since each party has a standard system of long-term goals with regard to each other. The asset swap plan proposed by Gazprom to its European partners can be described as a prototype of integration as Russia sees it now. So this is really a big change. Russia ceased to be, so to speak, an object of European policy, of expanding European values, and instead started to be a partner in a 100% imperial game in which differentiation of zones of interest or of zones of domination started to be proposed quite openly by Russia, and where, to put it in another quotation very shortly towards the end of my presentation here, gas for everything else took place of the former, so to speak, idea of Russia getting higher to European standards. As the European Union, after Russia-Ukraine gas disputes this year and last year, has realized the degree of its dependence on energy supply from Russia and the difficulty of finding a real alternative to them, it has toned down its criticism against Russian humanitarian issues such as human rights, democracy, freedom of speech, and others. This was very interesting to follow because usually Europeans used to be very active just in this field. But last 2 years they completely or almost completely withdrew their efforts from that, giving Americans opportunity to criticize Russia for all these topics. To conclude, I would say that the best, I would say, Polish position in this picture would be to reorient the EU and German position to reinvigorate European project as vibrant proposal based on common values, at least the most basic of them, that is able to expand eastward once again, with possible prospect also to influence Russia in order to make her more, so to speak, responsive for human rights problems and human rights violations. And this is how this harsh legacy of historical past that is still dividing us, I mean Eastern Europeans and Western Europeans, Eastern Europeans being those who understand what is KGB, what is NKVD, just like Russians understand this, can be overcome with time. Otherwise, we would risk, I would say, a situation in which Eastern Europe is taken once again as a bargain terrain for real politics powers. On eastern side it would be Russian Empire, reluctant, so to speak, ex-empire, and on the western part those who feel themselves entitled to rule or to represent Europe as the only, so to speak, true European powers, such as Germany, France, or any other partners Russia would like to choose. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I would like to go to Cornelius Ochman straight away of the Bertelsmann Foundation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for the invitation and for the possibility to speak to you. Let me start with one remark regarding the presentation of Mr. Nowak. I don't agree with the position of our Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Steinmeier, with his article in the Internationale Politik. But there is one point. Steinmeier presented this article a few months ago as a private person. And this approach of interaction and integration was not adopted by a German government as an official German position. So there is a point, there is a political point. This position presented by Steinmeier has no support from Chancellor Merkel. And if you know the history or the development of the political life of Mr. Steinmeier, who was chief of staff of Schröder's Chancellor's office, so the foreign or the eastern policy of Steinmeier is a kind of continuation of the Schröder's policy as a chancellor. the article in the International Politik about interaction and integration is really positive. There is a very positive picture of Russia, and I don't agree with this picture. But on the other hand, this approach of interaction and integration, it's approach which should be discussed in the European Union, because we have two levels of the discussion. The first one is the level of current problems with Russia, problems not only of Poland with Russia, but it's a problem of relations between the European Union and Russia. It's the one level. Another level, a higher level, is a strategic discussion in the European Union how to deal with Russia in the future, how to deal with Russia in the 21st century. So I would suggest to see this approach of Steinmeier on the second level, and to discuss a little bit more the current relations between EU and Russia. I completely agree with your conclusion of new Ostpolitik. But one remark, the term Ostpolitik, there is a first problem in German-Polish relations, because Ostpolitik has a very positive connotation in the German public opinion and in the German political life. For the ruling coalition in Poland, this term Ostpolitik is not acceptable. We have a lot of problems with Polish representatives to use this term, because this term Ostpolitik has a negative connotation because of the historical development. Willy Brandt's Ostpolitik was positive, not for the German political elite, but for the Polish elite. It was a policy oriented on Russia. So we have to find a term which could be a kind of compromise for the German and Polish political elite. But please allow me, I would use this term here to discuss the current problems in EU-Russian relations. One remark about your conclusion. If Poland would like to play more important role in creation of the EU policy towards Russia, Poland should present or make a step forwards in the question of the EU constitution. Because the EU constitution or a new EU treaty is necessary to create a EU policy towards Russia. So we will come to this topic in the afternoon in the discussion or in the panel about the current EU constitution problems in the European Union. But there is a clear link and a clear relation between these two topics. Coming back to the relations EU policy towards Russia. We have currently three problems. The first one is the question of partnerships and cooperation agreement, which will expire at the end of November. And the talks between EU and Russia are blocked by the Polish veto regarding the ban of Polish meat exports to Russia. The German presidency is currently working on this topic, but I'm not really optimistic. We will have an EU-Russian summit in Samara in the end of May, 20th of May or 19th of May, and I think that there is not the problem of the Polish veto is important in this question. More important is the Russian internal development. I cannot follow, or I can follow Russian policy to create a new policy towards EU because of the parliamentarian and presidential elections. So Russia is not ready for a new agreement with the European Union, and the European Union has to accept it. There is no tragedy. We will continue the current legal framework. The agreement will be postponed, and the legal agreement is existing, so there is no tragedy, but I don't expect a new agreement in this year or in the next 2 years. The second problem is, or are the energy relations and the Nord Stream pipeline. This question is, or this pipeline created a lot of tensions in the Polish-German relations, but there is a clear interest of German energy sector, and this agreement was signed between economic actors with involvement of Chancellor Schröder, but Schröder informed the Polish government about it, and the Polish reaction is clear, but from my point of view, I don't think that Poland can block this pipeline. And the question is how to find a compromise. Chancellor Merkel cannot block this pipeline for economic and political reasons. And there is a clear proposal from the German side to build a bypass from this pipeline, bypass back from Germany to Poland. It's the costs are minimal. There's a 80-kilometer pipeline from Greifswald to Szczecin, and it could be a kind of compromises. But I'm not sure if the Polish side is ready to accept it. The third problem in EU-Russian relations is the question of historical policy. You know what happened in Estonia, and you know the clear Polish support for the Estonian side. The reaction of the German presidency was a little bit problematic. Steinmeier waited a few days for official reaction, but there is still a link between the interests of economic interests of the European Union and of the policy of the Baltic countries and Poland in this context. I think that a more pragmatical approach from the Baltic countries would create more understanding in the European Union for this topic. And there is a clear picture of the Russian behavior. For the majority of Russians, the Second World War, especially the years 44, 45, is still a historical victory And we will not change this understanding of Russia. For the Baltic countries, for the Poles, for others, Russian victory is, from historical point of view, it's a new occupation. And I try to explain it. I will misuse this as a kind of advertising for my last publication I published in German in Polen Analysen to explain this problem. I have an English translation of my article on my own website. I agree with the discussion, or with the conclusion of the discussion in the first panel, that we need more discussion in the European Union about historical policy. We need more understanding for the behavior of Baltic countries, of Poland, and so on. But once again, more understanding or a clear position of the European Union in this topic is still linked with reform of the European Union, with new institutions, with a new structure of the European Union, which is necessary to create a common foreign policy, to create a common approach towards Eastern Europe, towards not only towards Russia, but it's necessary for creation of the common position towards the direct neighborhood in the east of the European Union. Only with new institutions in the European Union we can create a common policy towards Ukraine, towards Belarus and Moldova. So at the end of my presentation, it's my clear position, a new Eastern policy of the European Union could be created only with new institutions in the European Union. Thank you.
Well, this remark in some ways anticipated, as you rightly said, our last panel. We have had two very different perspectives on the problem now, and I'm wondering whether Jan Ross will be the judicious mediator between the two.
Yeah, thank you very much. These were indeed wide-ranging, excellent presentations. There's not much left over for me, only a few unsystematic remarks, but then that is what you would expect from a journalist. As I thought about what I would say here, a book came to my mind, many of you probably know. That is a book written by Timothy Garton Ash, In Europe's Name. It is a book on German Ostpolitik, Entspannungspolitik, Détente. And the bottom line, or one of the bottom lines of the book, is that this German Ostpolitik was, as Cornelius already mentioned, always obsessed with Russia, much more so than with the Central European countries. And in a way, this is still a troubling legacy or heritage for German Polish, German Czech, German Slovak, German Baltic relations nowadays. Things became better in the 1990s, I think, when Chancellor Kohl was quite successful in striking a balance between continuing to have a very good relation with the first Soviet and then Russian leadership, that is with Gorbachev first and then with Yeltsin, on the one hand, and on the other hand, the Federal Republic became the driving force behind the efforts to integrate Poland and the other Central European countries into NATO and into the European Union. So there was a kind of balance there. Things became worse with Schröder, with this time after 2001, with the Iraq War, which was a time of tensions in the West, and in Europe, between old Europe and new Europe, as you know, when a very close relationship between Germany and Russia, Schröder and Putin, this axis of peace together with Chirac, began to dominate German foreign policy. So, what is the situation now? What are things like now in 2007 with regard to Germany, Central Europe, and Russia? I'd like to point out just a few elements. The first is, I think, the love story with Putin is over. There was such a thing. When he first came to Germany, he spoke German fluently in the Bundestag. He quoted Goethe, Schiller, you name it. And there's, of course, still something very emotional between Germans and Russians. In the past, it used to be fear or hatred, and nowadays it's more sympathy. But still, Putin, as a person and as a politician, has overplayed his hand, I think, also in the view of the German public. You know the story of Schröder becoming more or less an employee of Gazprom, and this has been a very, very embarrassing experience, also in the eyes of the German public. I think this was not what they expected from a former chancellor. Or if you think of Putin's speech at the Munich Security Conference, with his attack on the missile defense idea and his talk about a new Cold War, this was more frightening, I think, for the German public than certainly reassuring, and it was not creating sympathy for the Russian position. I think we are really over the tipping point here as far as German sympathy with this kind of Russian politics is concerned. Having said that, there's still not very much appetite in Germany for any kind of open confrontation with Russia. I think there are three reasons for that. One is the near pacifist mentality in contemporary Germany, which is extremely uneasy about anything that has to do with missiles, with a possible arms race or something like that. The second reason is, obviously, there is zero trust in anything the Bush administration thinks, says, or does, and missile defense and the whole idea of confronting Russia is associated with certain elements in the Bush administration. And there's a third reason, which is the most important in our context and also the most troubling, I think. There is still a certain condescension towards the new Europeans, the new NATO allies, the new EU members. Quite often it seems to me that Germans still accept that there is an extended Russian sphere of influence in Eastern Europe. Or, to put it more sharply, that Germans still don't think of Poland or Estonia or the Czech Republic as countries entitled to the same rights and to the same Western or European solidarity as Spain or Sweden. There's still this tendency that was pointed out by Garton Ash in his review of the Entspannungspolitik in the 1980s. There's still this tendency to put these new EU countries, below Russia in the international political pecking order. But now they are full members of EU and NATO, so that is a difference. This was about public opinion. With regard to the government, it's not, the German government, it's not exactly split on Russia, but as Cornelius already pointed out, there is a palpable difference between Christian Democrats and Social Democrats, between Chancellor Merkel and Foreign Minister Steinmeier. in their policy towards Russia. Steinmeier may not be as friendly with Putin as Schröder was, but he's certainly more pro-Russian than Merkel. And Merkel may not be as hostile towards Russia, towards Putin, as, for example, US Vice President Cheney sometimes seems to be, but she's certainly more critical of Russia than Steinmeier is. The tensions are below the surface, mostly below the surface, but they are always there. Especially because looking too pro-American is one of the few things Merkel has to fear, and on the other hand, being pro-peace is one of the few things that make the Social Democrats popular in German politics. So a few words about the consequences, or what would a sensible German policy towards Russia look like? First, I think there should be a rational assessment of how much does Russia matter? I mean, there's always this talk about Russia becoming a first-rate world power again, Russia rising again. I'm not sure whether that is true. I'm not sure whether I would really buy it. Everyone who has been to Russia and to China or India knows the difference. This is no superpower of the 21st century. This is still a dying country of alcoholism, AIDS, you name it. They have, of course, this impressive arsenal of atomic weapons, but it is not one of the emerging powers of this century. There is one area where Russia certainly matters, that is energy. It's important enough. We in Europe, that is the second point, would therefore we have an interest in having access to Russia's energy, to its natural gas, as an alternative to Persian Gulf natural gas or Algerian gas. This is a particular European interest, a common European interest, not only for Germany or France, but for the Czech Republic or Poland as well. And it is specifically European because there are no pipelines from Russia to the US, and very few from Russia to China. This is a specific common European interest, so we do not want to alienate or antagonize Russia. And the third point is we have to be clear about our relationship to Russia. It may be called, we can only reject this worldview. Europe is no go-between or mediator between the US and Russia. Russia must not be allowed to split Europe. We as Germans, I think, should not take part in some Central European fantasies of a continuing Cold War, but nor will we let the Russians treat the new Europeans with less respect than the old ones. And my last point is we may not have much influence on what's going on in Russia domestically, what's going on inside Russia, how the government deals with citizens' rights, for example. But of course we can and should say what we see and tell the truth about what's going on in this country. That's what we can always do. Thank you.
Nicholas Arena. I'm an attorney in New York. I have a question for Mr. Ross, who just finished talking. And I think that if he had more time, he might have referred to Putin's statement that the fall of the Soviet Union, and words to that effect, was the greatest catastrophe of the 20th century. Now, in terms of what we're talking about here, what do you think he really meant? And what are the implications of this statement for both the United States and Europe?
Thank you very much. Well, I'll take perhaps one more question and then, yes, please.
My name is Pavel Natas. My question is, can Russia become a democratic country? Is it possible for Russia to become a democratic country? Thank you.
Well, wonderful, brief questions. But since they are quite big questions, I would suggest that I ask the panel to pick them up now, and then we have another round. Okay? Just, I don't know, Jan Ross, would you like to take up the first question, and then the panel perhaps the second one?
Well, I definitely can't say anything about Russia becoming a democracy. So I think what Putin meant was simply that it was a strategic defeat for Russia. I mean, I don't think that he wanted to say anything about the ideology of communism. What he meant is that the Soviet Empire was the latest form of Russian great power, and that it has gone, and that this is catastrophic from the Russian point of view. I don't think that he really referred to, or wanted to refer to, communism. So it has less to do with the history of ideas and more with great power relations, and what it tells us is what a certain milieu in Moscow thinks like.
Well, if I may add one point, you know, I think empires, if you think of the British Empire also, always have enormous difficulties reconciling themselves to the fact that they no longer exist and have disappeared, and I think that was probably also behind that. Is there anyone who wants to take up the democracy? Or this could be very good.
Yes. Few words about it. I discussed this question with my students in Moscow. I just came back a few weeks ago from Moscow. I worked with students at the German-Russian Institute for Journalists, and we discussed this question, the speeches of Putin, and 90% of the people taught in this context about the Soviet, not empire, but the Soviet achievements in social policy, education, and industrialization. So Putin was not speaking in this context about foreign policy and about empire. If we analyze the development in Russia in the 90s, the Yeltsin time, it was really a breakdown of the social system, social security, health security, and so on. It was a catastrophe for the education system in Russia and so on. And Putin, speaking to Russians and not to Americans, related to this achievement of the Soviet Union. So I wouldn't overestimate this speech about foreign policy. So another question is the speech of Putin during the security conference in Munich, where he defined the interest of Russia in a global policy. And here, I think we need a EU-American dialogue about this, because there are different positions.
Okay, Professor Novak?
Let me add also a short commentary. Actually, as regards to the question concerning Putin's statement on the greatest catastrophe in the 20th century, I would say that most Russians, according to polls made during this particular statement, during the time that this particular statement was made, took this as rather in a way as Mr. Ross put it, namely as a manifestation of national longing for imperial position. According to polls taken in 2003, 4 and 5 by the Vada Center, the most respected sociologist center in Russia, educational problems, social problems were considered only a second-rank problems in comparison with the place of Russia in the world. What we want Russia would be: peaceful country, cultural country, well-regarded country as a democratic country in the world. There were some 1, 2, 3% of responses yes for this. We want that Russia be treated as a great empire, be feared. 20, 30, 40% of answers yes. But it was only in 2003 and 4. So it has nothing to do probably with history of ideas, but with history of mentality. And this mentality is changing. This is my answer to your question, fundamental question, whether Russia can be a democratic country. In the beginning of the 90s, it seemed that Russia is in a good path towards this. The polls taken in 1991, 1992 were completely different. We want to be a democratic country. We want to join the West. These were predominant answers during those years. And after that, everything went wrong, so to speak, very briefly. And Russia went back in its mental structures to its imperial history. It is very difficult to overcome this, as our chairman stated, but it is possible. So I believe that, this is only my personal statement, that it is possible with the help of external, if not pressure, then at least external commentaries, as it was stated here. We don't like what is going on now in Russia. We can state it openly, and that will influence Russian public. It is not true that they don't take seriously what is said outside. They treat it, especially in the West, they treat it as a very important signal how we are perceived. And this influences also internal changes in Russia. So I think it is important to send these signals. You can be democratic, you can be like us, but you have to change your system and your mentality to some extent.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'd like to open a second round now. There were, yes, if you would come, I'll take 3 this time in a row, then you and Professor Crossington. Yes, please.
Just a short comment on your opinion about the reason why
Could you speak up?
There is a kind of reluctance towards the idea of Ostpolitik in Poland. I think that it is not only the reason that this politics was oriented to Russia, but also it was oriented to Polish Communist Party and was neglected totally, for example, Solidarity Movement, for SPD politicians. The main partner in Poland were Polish communists and not Solidarity activists. For example, Mieczysław Rakowski, one of the leading persons in Polish Communist Party, was proud of his contacts with SPD in the 80s, and at the same time these people were not willing to meet Wałęsa and other Solidarity activists. So this is a very important reason, and there are a kind of resemblance between this fact and the nowadays situation, when there are much more interesting relations with Russia than in Poles. And this is maybe because this is the reason why, for example, such person like Ronald Reagan was much more popular in Poland in the 80s than Willy Brandt. And the American policy toward Russia was rather popular in Poland, and Ostpolitics was rather neglected in Poland in that way. So maybe this is real reason for that reluctance in Poland.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, please.
Yes, hello. My name is Ann Wagner from Dyson, and my question to the panelists, I'm an attorney, and my question to the panelists is as follows. To the extent that the EU may be positioning itself towards a post-Putin Russia, is there, in your opinion, any room left over, or should there be, for individual member states such as Poland and Germany to do analogous positioning?
Thank you, very good. Professor Krasnodębski.
Yes, I have a question to Mr. Hoffman, because when we considered 2 facts, which I should realistically consider, the first fact is striking lacking of solidarity, lack of solidarity in Europe in recent years. After the enlargement, Europe is different, and this is split. Yeah? Mr. Ross warned again, but it is in reality split in all these conflicts. Actually, old Europe is always, seeking excuses for Russia. Yeah, when the sentiments and reaction in New Europe, Eastern Europe is totally different. So it's clearly. Then the second fact is this policy, Russia first. This really, we all know this is very deeply rooted in German tradition in 19th century, and so on. In sentiments of the people, in rational interests, and if you compare, I never will forget, the standing ovation of Bundestag to, Putin and so on, KGB agent in East Germany. Yeah, but if you consider these two facts, so what, because you said that the solution is the European Treaty and the common European policy. But that question is, what guarantee us, me, my children in Poland, that this policy, this future policy would be not, policy of Steinmeier, Schroeder, or something like that, the dominant country with all these sentiments, with all this tradition, with lack actually on sensibility, about, but also of interest. No? And I think that, all of this happened in the recent years. So led to the capital of Vertrauens capital, the capital of trust for Germany diminished in Central Europe rapidly, and this is why the capital of trust of United States is growing in this region once again.
Well, thank you. I think I would like to ask Mr. Ochman in the first instance to try to respond to this, and then, of course, the other two panelists have their say.
Currently, Poland can block with veto the talks with Russia about the new agreement. I think in the future, after the European Union accept a new treaty, and on the basis of this treaty, a common foreign and security policy will be possible. The influence of Poland on the common European foreign policy will grow. And the European position, a common European position towards Russia, towards Ukraine and so on, is much more important than the opportunity or the possibility of current blockade of Poland. So, in such a sense, Poland can influence in a positive way a European position. Currently, Poland can influence the position towards Russia only in a negative sense, and I think it's the advantage. And there is much more complicated because we are still the work is still in progress. We cannot say that today we don't have a common policy towards Russia, and tomorrow we will have one after the treaty will be accepted. But in a negative way, you cannot influence in the long term the development. And there are in Germany, in the European Union, there are people who are interested in a long-term development with Russia. So your question about democracy, I think that only in this way we can influence in the positive sense the development in Russia if we create a common European position and if Putin and Russia will see that there is a common EU position. Without this common approach, Russia will in the next century every time try to divide the Europeans and to divide the European Americans in this context. So it's my clear position, only a European common point of view with the Polish influence. With the Polish influence, and not only Polish influence, but Baltic countries, Slovakia, and so on. And if you analyze the development in the European Parliament and the reactions of the EP in the last 2-3 years, you can clearly see that the European Parliament became much more involved in Eastern European development than before enlargement. Russia, Ukraine, and so on. Before enlargement, without Polish and without parliamentarians from Central Europe, the European Parliament was not so active in this context. And there is the same chance in a new European Union with a new treaty. More influence, and not more influence in a positive sense.
Okay, thank you very much. Any of the other panelists who want to pick up also some of the other questions that have been asked? Professor Nova?
Maybe I would like only to add a commentary to Professor Krasnodębski's statement concerning lack of, so to speak, diminishment of confidence in Poland as regards German position towards Russia in past 5-7 years. I would like to say that this is not Putin's statement concerning the Soviet Union, this solution as the greatest catastrophe that created this kind of fear, so to speak, in Poland. But other statements done during especially 60th anniversary of the victory in Moscow 2 years ago, and especially commentaries given to Putin, by Putin to German public, and no great reaction on the side of Germans. I have in mind, for example, a long interview given to Putin to ARD, ZDF televisions, where Putin plainly stated that as regards Baltic states, which create always problems for us, Europe and Russia, we have given those countries independence in Brest-Litovsk Treaty, we, Germans and Russians, so we were entitled to take it back in 1939. This is something that he stated quite openly, justifying Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact, and there was no reaction on the side of German journalists. And something which is even more interesting and shows, I would call it, the clash of histories, not of civilizations, but the clash of histories in today's Europe, in today's enlarged European Union. On one side, Eastern European, so to speak, experience of history. On the other side, better off, so to speak, Western European experience of history. President Putin stated also in the same interview that the most prosperous times for Europe coincide historically with Russian-German close collaboration, which is more or less true for most of Germans and Russians. 19th century, wonderful times for development of both Germany and Russia. But for those in between, it was quite horrible experience. So this is something that cannot be easily overcome, I mean this clash of histories, but something that is an issue in contemporary European Union. We have to have our say within the EU, that's my opinion. And Russian position is they, that is East Central European, new members, new Europe, should not have any say within the EU, that's all.
I guess I'd like to say something.
Please, yes.
But I also guess that it has to do with what Zdzisław said, but I didn't quite catch the question. Could you repeat it?
The question was that to the extent the EU as an institution is positioning itself, which it undoubtedly is, to a post-Putin Russia, is there room left over, and should there be room left over, for individual member states, in this case Germany and Poland,
in shaping their policy to it?
Yes, in positioning themselves, and if so, what areas?
Well, my hope for EU policy with regard to post-Putin Russia would be that there can be a fresh start, fresh beginning. And that this kind of, well, we all have our histories with Putin now. There is the German Schröder thing. There is this kind of distortion of World War II history that the Central Europeans aren't happy with, and so on. So it is rather difficult to overcome this and to have a common position on Russia right now. But maybe with a post-Putin Russian leadership, it would be easier. Not that they would be more easy to deal with, but that there's less of historical baggage we all have with regard to this Russia.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Meckel, is there perhaps, yes, and why don't you ask your 2 questions, and I'm afraid then I would like to ask the panel to sort of sum up if they have any final points. So, Mr. Meckel, perhaps I should take his colleague at the same time. Yes, please.
I had sometimes the impression that the Polish position in that field is from their own perspective, that from our background we have to make our position strong in Europe. But what my experience is, that is, it is only a way going not to convince others and to bring them in a common position, but more to show the flag, and that's all that. And so I would like to ask in which way, and it's following the way which Cornelius went, in which way Poland is going to find allies to shape European positions on the one hand, and on the other hand, to make understandable their own positions, for instance, in historical questions. And I can't see that concrete proposals are raised or done to go that way of coming together and bringing that real to a European debate. And I think that's crucial for the future, because if we would like to have a European position in which that what from different Polish sides here is raised, then you have to bring it in the European conversation. And until now I can't see it really. I see only in this time, step by step, more isolation of Poland. And the question is, by which way you would like to overcome it?
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Zalewski. Contrast or consensus, and then you will have one final question, please. Yes.
First of all, I would like to congratulate the panelists for excellent presentations, and just present maybe 3 comments, because additional came after hearing to Marcus, and 1 question to the panelists. So,
please.
First is that, of course, I'm hearing all this kind of comments very carefully. This kind of comments which came from Marcus, especially when I know that they are coming from the friends of our country. So, if there are any questions regarding the Polish position, if there are any doubts, they all should be clarified, and that is the reason for deeper discussion, and so that is clear. But when Marcus said that we are only, as the Poles and the Polish government, that we are only just imposing the problems, but do not present the solutions, I think that it is not the truth. And I will give you 1 example, and it is also one of the comments to Mr. Altman presentation. One of the extremely important elements of the which affected Polish-German relations is the Nord Stream pipeline. And I would like to inform you all that there is the positive solution of the problem of supplies gas to the Western Europe. Poland understands this problem. We want to cooperate in solving this issue. There is a European concept accepted by the European Commission of the Amber pipeline, which would go through Latvia, Lithuania, Kaliningrad Oblast, Poland to Germany. That is the win-win position, that is the win-win solution, that is the solution which brings the cheaper gas to Western countries, not only to Germany. And of course, it is extremely important to get the answer from the German partner about this project, because it is not such a situation that the lone responsible country for the Nord Stream project is Russia, and Germany is the passive side. No, it is a common project done by the businesses of the two countries, and Germany is responsible in the same way as Russia is. So it has opportunity to advocate for the other better route. And in my opinion, that is the positive proposal, and that is the positive answer. Then the last comment about the institutions. I do believe in the EU as an institution, formula. We can invent new words to harmonize national interests into the common European interest. That is the key point. And I do believe in strengthening the EU. That is very important for Europe. However, at the moment, I do believe that what is lacking in Europe is not institutions, is not new institutions. We are lacking the political will to use the opportunities offered to us by the current treaty base. Because there is a lot of areas, according to the current treaties, we can deepen our cooperation, also in the foreign policy. But what is the situation? The situation is that Europe can agree with the foreign policy towards Sudan, towards Congo, towards Iran, not towards the most important question for the EU future as Russia. So my answer would be that do not create or do not impose the Eastern or the Russian policy or the policy towards Russia as hostage of institutional changes in Europe. What we should do is just to find the answer, the current answer, not waiting for the reforms, which even if we start discussion this year, will happen in next years. We have just the current problem to solve, and we should to concentrate on it. Now the question.
Yes, please.
Now the question. I'd like to ask my German colleagues, to which extent, according to them, the German policy at the moment is based on the realpolitik concept, or to which extent the German policy, foreign policy, especially towards Russia, is based on the concept of values. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, one last question, please.
I didn't hear his last word. Concept of values.
Values, yes. Please.
My name is Maria Rashi, and I just wanted to ask the panel whether the recent development in Putin's statement and Putin's attitude toward Poland is in a question deciding how he overlooks about 50 years of policy by trying to eliminate cutting as a crime against humanity, which Russia considered at the Nuremberg trial when they wanted to judge the Germans as the perpetrators of the crime. Also, the question of never bringing up the alliance between Hitler and Stalin in starting the Second World War. This comes down into the public domain, who doesn't know anything about it, and it's now said annihilate the question of cutting as a crime, a regular crime during the war, nothing to be punished. Is it also indicating the kind of Poland being mostly the object of kind of anger against the policy of pan-Slavism that was always in 19th century and always within the Russia itself, that the Poland being the biggest pan-Slavic part in their ideas, dared to raise the voice against Russia.
Well, thank you very much. Now, we have already overshot our time by a number of minutes, so could I ask the panel to respond to this, but very briefly.
There's no time. It's really late, so I will very briefly for the last question. Actually, for me, this is natural that Russia under Putin reacts this way for cutting issue. This is in their interest. The problem is with the EU reaction for this issue, and this is also the answer to Mr. Merkel's question. Actually, he asked if Poland tries to do anything in combining a kind of coalition within the EU for understanding this historical past. And Polish parliamentaries in the Euro Parliament tried to pass a declaration concerning cutting remembrance, and it was just rejected by the EU Parliament. So it is still difficult. They try, I mean, Polish politicians, some of them at least, but they find misunderstanding on the European, especially Western European level, which makes me go back to my statement that it is necessary to reinvigorate our historical discussions on the European level and our participancy in, if not historical clash, then at least in historical discussion and dialogue within Europe, with our own experience. And Pan-Slavism, I think, is absolutely not a vivid idea in Russia even now. It's there. So okay. I consider it a serious problem.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hoffmann, very briefly, if you want to.
Okay. So to Mr. Zalewski, there are two developments. Mrs. Merkel is presented more as a value-oriented policy towards Russia, and Mr. Steinmeier as a realpolitik. We have a big coalition in Germany, so and we will have a kind of compromises between these both approaches. And regarding the Amber pipeline, I think that the reality is that both Gazprom and the German partners started to build the pipeline, and the politics will not influence anymore this development. If there is a chance to influence this development, it's only on a legal way, from the point of view of legal open questions regarding the Baltic Sea and so on, which territories are the question of risks regarding with construction and so on, but not the political influence.
Thank you very much, and Jan Ross.
Yeah, with regard to realpolitik and values, I think Germany is more realpolitik minded. That is not confined to relations with Russia. It is the general state of the mind, I would say. Germans were very wary of these neoconservative ideas of transforming the broader Middle East and so on. I'm not sure that I really like this approach, but it is certainly not only about Russia. And my second point is, you are right, I think. The problem of the EU now is not institutions, but a lack of political will. But the inability or unwillingness to agree on institutions is also a manifestation of this lack of political will you have been highlighting.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I think we had, I wouldn't want to say, call it dissenting contributions, but very interesting complementary contributions which have led to a very interesting dialogue between you and the panelists. There are 2 points that, if I may try to sort of look into the afternoon, that I think did not come out here. Namely, first of all, how domestic politics feed into the foreign policy positions that we have been talking about. And I think this will perhaps come out in the first panel this afternoon. And then, of course, there is still the elephant in the room, the United States, and how it impacts, and not just how Brussels and Europe impacts on European, Polish, but also German positions. And I'm hoping that in the final panel we may actually come back to this, because that also raised the question which we've just had of Bismarck versus Wilson, and the question of Realpolitik versus some sort of value system that should also feed into the making of foreign policy. Therefore, thank you very much for coming this morning.